Welcome everyone for this AMA session. And it looks like about 80 people are there, so we're hoping that more people will join. So I have only like 3-4 slides just to showcase ACM India social media handles. So if you're not already following ACM India on any of these social media platforms, please follow. We are now on Twitter, Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn, and we also have a YouTube channel where all of these videos also get showcased. For example, this video, as I'm recording, I'll actually upload it on the YouTube channel of ACM India. So this is the PhD clinic. So given that many of the discussion are going to be about PhD, joining PhD, to do or not to do PhD, I thought I'll also showcase the PhD clinic idea. And we're also hoping that a lot of students, a lot of participants in many of this, cross flow between this AMA, PhD clinic, summer school, winter school, all of that. So the PhD clinic, the idea is that so this is many to many discussion, like 4 panelists, and many students are asking questions and answer. Whereas PhD clinic is like one-to-one session where you get a chance to interact with the professor, with the person in the industry, talking about your research and getting some inputs. And that's about an hour that you get to interact with. Recently, we just completed 100 sessions. Like 2 days back, we completed 100. Students have come to 100 students have come to the sessions, and it's actually pretty satisfying to see the feedback also that we're getting from PhD students, that they feel very, very happy about getting these inputs from experts in their own area. It's specifically driven by faculty and researchers in the area where the students are working on. So here's a list of mentors. So there are about 32 mentors right now, and the institutes are listed on the right-hand side. The areas are cutting across different areas of computing. So this is 100 PhD students. So these are all pictures taken from the one-to-one session where students and mentors are interacting. Today, the AMA is with 4 great panelists. And the question also is that to do or not to do PhD. If you think about it, the last 2 AMAs that we did, the first one was with Professor Ravi and Professor Madhavan, talking about just generally life in PhD, all of that. Then we moved on to the AMA for getting a job in industry. We had Google, Microsoft, IBM. They gave us insights on how to actually find a job in industry. So then during this process, I think there was some discussion about, look, these are all PhD students, discussions, all that, but there's a big pool of students in India who yet don't know what to do with it, right? They're in this dilemma of, oh, should I do PhD? Should I not do PhD? I want to start PhD. I'm working in the industry. What should I do? How do I do all that? So that's when we thought that it'll be actually pretty nice to set up an AMA only for actually answering this question, that to do or not to do PhD. Also have a panel which is also looking at different sides of this question. For example, Professor Jayant Haritsa is a professor at IISc. He can talk about getting a PhD and being a professor. Dr. Shourya, who's at Flipkart now, can actually talk about PhD and working in industry. Nupur and Nitendra can talk about actually the industry side and life without a PhD. I think the question that we also wanted to see a discussion between here, saying that, look, what is life with and without PhD? That's the whole idea that we set this up. So let's see how it goes. And thanks for actually people, whoever registered. We got about 567 registration just a few minutes before I started this call. And it's also interesting that there are some professors who have also joined this call to find answers to these questions so they can actually tell it to others. One professor actually filled the form with this line saying, I'm a professor, plan to attend this session to see how I can answer these questions to my students, which is so nice. I thought that our target audience is only students, but it looks like our target audience is actually also professors to whom we can actually give some solutions. So the social media handles I said, and to introduce the panel, Nupur is a research engineer at IBM, alum of IIT Delhi and Purdue University. Professor Jayant Haritsa is an alum of IIT Madras and University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he's a professor at IISc and he's a president of ACM India. Dr. Shourya is an alum of Jadavpur University, IIT Bombay, and then a PhD at IISc. Now currently serves as Senior Research Director at Flipkart, and he's also the Vice Chair of ACM SIG KDD. Nitendra Rajput is the Vice President of MasterCard, and he also runs his AA Garage, and he's an alum of IIT Bombay. So I think we have a good mix of people from different backgrounds. Okay. So I think I addressed all of this. Specific, yeah. So there are some questions. So what we have done is we have taken all your questions, 567. I think about 400 people filled questions. We took all the questions, curated it, put them in some not really logical order, but some grouping. I've already shared the questions with the panelists. They've taken a look at it. So we'll go through the questions a little bit. But there were some questions which are very, very specific to so to say, which algorithm to use in my research. I think those things I kind of said that we'll push it to the PhD clinic. I've individually also sent emails to such students who had asked this question saying, please sign up for the PhD clinic so that you can actually get more inputs from there. And please use the chat window for the questions, because we will address some questions here and then we'll take up questions as in the fly, because I think many of you who are attending may get more questions as you get the answers also. And feel free to use all the emojis, plus ones, while you're getting some answers also. So the way we'll do is, as I said, we have curated a question. I will pose a question to one of the panelists, and others can chime in also. And panelists have the right to move on, talk about, chime in any question that they want. Okay? Okay. So now I'll stop sharing the screen, and we can take, I will read out some questions. We can take it from there. Panelists, anything you wanted to add? Is that good? We can start with questions. But that's good. We already have like reached 100 plus participants, which is nice. I think this is the first AMA we have 100 plus participants. That's also good. Okay. So first question is to see how much is academic research different from industrial research, and is PhD necessary if one wants to pursue industrial research, or an MS would suffice? Given that this is about industry, I'm going to pose first this to Nupur, and then we'll take it from there. Jayant.
Sure. So I'll talk about industry research, and I think I'm going to talk specifically about from the perspective of how things are done in IBM research. So my answers would be a little bit very specific to IBM research. So I think like at least in IBM research, the research is sort of very much aligned to companies' goals and targets, right? For example, IBM is sort of currently investing heavily in AI and hybrid cloud. So the general expectation from the lab itself is that the researchers and the engineers there are going to produce a body of work that will help IBM, the parent company, in advancing in AI and cloud, and sort of make them a market leader and generate differentiated products, right? But I think academic research may not have such expectations because, you know, it's just that the source of funding is different. And while even in industry research, I would say that it's very important to publish high quality papers, it's actually also expectation at the same time that the research should get converted into products. And it's also expected out of researchers that, you know, you should be able to transfer the research that you're producing within the lab into products. So be able to write code accordingly, be able to scale it up. So there's a general set of expectations that comes a little bit different, I would say. So does that answer the first question, I think?
Yeah, let's move on. That's okay. So I think
if I can just jump in here.
Yes,
Okay. So my view is that you really don't need any degree to do research. Forget a PhD or MS or even a BTech. You just need a creative mind. Okay? And the PhD degree is only a license to torture young students and corrupt their minds. So the experience of the PhD may prepare you for a long-term life of research, since it gives you the time required for this process of self-realization. And for a purely academic career, it's a basic requirement. But beyond that, I don't think we should necessarily connect up degrees with the kind of work that one does. It really comes in from the innate creativity that you have.
Yeah, I think that's a very well point. So basically, PhD sort of develops a certain skill set, right? And those skill set can be developed without having a PhD also. And I think that's the reason even within IBM research, we have a healthy population of people with and without PhD. and all sorts of people sort of succeeding within the lab, have a good career growth. So I don't see it's a necessary to have it, but it's sort of necessary to have, like Jayant said, right, a creative mind to be successful.
Okay.
Which I think, just let me, it's not again very specific to research, right? In general, whatever career you choose, you need to have a creative mind. You need to be eager to learn new things to sort of just progress in that field.
Sure. Yeah.
It may also be good to think of research not as just one single thing, right? It is made of different colors in some sense, as you see the colors of the paintings behind me. But so that's where I think the subtle differences come in. So if you're talking about academic research in general, you will have a more ecosystem wherein you can do more long-term things, maybe more theoretical, more fundamental stuff, but practically speaking within industry, while it is also still research, but it is a different flavor of research wherein you're trying to do things that are more applied, perhaps things in the industry. It's also very important to have the timing right. You're doing the thing at the right time rather than something that will yield results.
Yeah. So I think we got a little blip, but I think I'm assuming we are back. Nitendra, you can hear me? Yeah. Okay. Good. So let's go to the next question. I think there are lots of questions to discuss. So so this is to Shourya. The question is: I've recently joined Capgemini. I'm really interested in research related to quantum computing and AI. Is it feasible to pursue PhD outside India after a few years of work experience?
Sure. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, Shourya.
Great. Okay. First of all, before answering the question, for me, it's a privilege to be in the same panel with Jayant, who was the head of the CSA department in IISc when I did my PhD there. So that's, and that was a little late in life, but that more about it later. I'll come there. Now, coming to the question, I don't know anything about quantum computing. I know a bit about AI, but generally talking about doing PhD outside India after a few years of experience, yes, it is. The answer is yes. And I have known actually many people who have worked for a few years and before going for a PhD. And in fact, in many of those cases where the candidates work in, especially in industrial labs, where they actually worked on like these applied research areas and published papers based on those work that actually helped them in their pursuing of the doctoral studies or further studies in the outside India, maybe have been getting into place into better institutes or things of that nature. So in general, not only it is possible, but it may be actually a good idea as well.
Sure. Yeah. So again, for the participants who are there and seeing the chat as empty, please start posting questions if you have to the answers that you're getting from panel or other questions that you want to ask. It will be nice to actually look for. Can we just get a +1 if you're even listening to me for the participants? So that I know the chat is working. Yeah, okay, the chat is working. Okay, let's good, great. So yeah, please post your questions, whatever thoughts you have, and react also to the answers that the panelists are giving, saying that you agree or however you want. Okay. Next question is to Jayant, is how is life during a PhD process and after a PhD? What makes a good PhD and how to conduct good research?
Yeah, so this is actually a huge question. So,
It's a loaded question, but yeah.
so bear with me if I take the next 20 minutes and do it. Yes. So, okay. My answer to the first part is that there are 3 answers to how life is during a PhD process: tough, tough, and tough. Okay? The reason is that if you are tackling a challenging problem, it is not going to just roll over and accept to be solved. Okay? You have to pay the dues owed to the problem, and you have to spend months and years wrestling over it, just like you saw in the Dangal movie. Okay? It will not happen overnight, because otherwise then it's not a challenging problem. The second issue is that PhD is inherently a non-deterministic and serendipitous exercise. You have to get used to it. You cannot say, I'll get up in the morning today and say, today is great ideas day, and I'll have one by 5 p.m. Often the best ideas come at the least expected time. And I'll just give you an example from my own experience. a radical idea we had about robust query processing in databases, which has subsequently led to 2 highly successful PhD theses, came at the Jolarpet station when I was returning on the Lalbagh Express from IIT Madras in Chennai. Now, maybe the idli sambar at the Jolarpet station was particularly potent, but the point I'm trying to highlight is that you are not really in control during the PhD. The problem is in charge. Yeah? So now, if you survive the PhD process, then the shit really hits the fan, because now everybody expects you to be the fount of wisdom on all subjects under the sun. Okay. After all, what did you do during this long PhD process? Surely you must have read up Wikipedia, right? So the second is that you as a person have also become unmanageable, because now you're used to thinking for yourself and you don't want to explain yourself to the MBA wallas in your organization. So finally, to the last part of the question, the typical notions of a good PhD are that it should be relevant to the application, relevant to society, relevant to industry, relevant to environment, whatever. Okay. Now, all this is fine if in case your problem does have it, but I would say fundamentally, you shouldn't even be worrying about it. In my book, it is like what Vidya Balan said in the dirty picture: creativity, creativity, creativity. That's all that you should be looking at. The best research is the one that overturns the conventional wisdom, where people's initial reaction when you say it is one of disbelief and saying, no, this can't be so. Okay? And then you have to actually convince them otherwise, kicking and screaming. And then they reluctantly say, yeah, actually, you're right. The reason I say this is the best research is because it then means that you saw something that everybody else has been looking at, but only you were able to perceive the truth in that. So to me, the surprise element in research is the most important for a good PhD, because then it means that you spend the effort to go beyond the obvious. Everybody else saw the same thing, but did not make the same connection. So just to give you a quick example, all of us remember this story about Kekule and the benzene ring, where supposedly he had this vision in his mind of snakes chasing their own tails, and therefore you got this nice cyclic structure. Yeah? Now you should ask yourself, okay, maybe Kekule was having various kinds of opioids in order to get such dreams, but had we had the same dream with the snakes chasing their own tails, what would we have thought? In India, we would have called it Nag Panchami, right? So the question is, you may see the same thing, but you may not connect it up the same way. So unless you have paid your dues to the problem, you will not be able to connect the dreams that you're having with the problem that you are actually solving. And for that, as Louis Pasteur said, luck favors the prepared mind. And what he means by that is the preparation is very important. You have to keep working hard at it, and suddenly everything will fall into place. But you cannot say overnight, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do this. And that is a fallacy that is something that you need to kind of demystify at the beginning of your PhD itself. You're in here for the long haul. You're here for the test match, a long test match, and certainly not for IPL. Okay? So 36 runs takes a very short time to score, as you saw recently. We can't do it that way here. Okay, so I think I answered some of the very numerous questions that were there, and maybe the others can now jump in. And,
yeah, sure.
Sure.
So let's take more questions. I'm also seeing the chat. If you're following the chat, please do. I'm also seeing that some questions are coming. People are doing +1 for others' questions. We'll take some of that. So this question is to Nitendra. So how to decide if I should go for PhD or gain those skill sets through industrial experience over time? I think this question has been repeating. If you see the general list of questions saying that, look, 5 years into PhD versus 5 years into industry is my career path, is my goals, all of that. How do I achieve? I think that's the question.
Yeah, and I think it's important actually to understand and question ourselves, what do we want to do after those 5 years? Whether I do a PhD or whether I spend those 5 years in the industry, the path that I take will depend on where do I want to go next. And if I would want to build, as Professor Jayant, if you want to build a career in academia, then definitely PhD is the right thing to do. If you want to go more technical or more deeper, then maybe PhD is a good thing to do. If you want to apply and build solutions that can actually be scaled, which can be used significantly large with users and so on and so forth, then perhaps it's important to see how you can sustain, how you will actually get business out of it. How do you create an ecosystem so that there are people who can support those and so on, which is where you need more of a industrial or an organizational structure. So I would say that your answer would depend on where you want to be after that. And also, if if you think where you want to be, you can get that experience in the industry. Let me take my own example. When I was asking this question to myself, whether to continue at IBM or do a PhD, the kind of things that I was getting at IBM while being at IBM Research were like the ability to do more research, to do more publications and so on, which in fact I would have gotten similar stuff had I wanted to do a PhD that time. But if I was in some other company, perhaps in a startup, I wouldn't have had those publications. So then the current industrial setup that you have, does it even offer those opportunities which you would otherwise get in a PhD? That could also be a one decision that can identify what to do or not. Eventually, I think these are two different things, and you actually learn very good stuff in both the things. I mean, I've not done a PhD, but I can really see that while you are at 5 years in the industry working on research related problems, you also learn a lot of things about what is an important problem, what's an important business problem, what are the timelines like out there, and so on. How do you actually create support within your organizational structure so that you can sell that problem and you can get investment in that problem from your peers and so on. So those are the skills which you gain beyond just working on the problems and research as well, which is extremely important in the industrial setting as well.
So I'm going to get
if I may add, sorry, PK, if I may add to what Nitendra said, yeah, I mean, we know there are certain pros on academia and certain pros on industry, right? I mean, academic research gives you research freedom, teaching, one of the most noble profession for you to pursue. Industry, on the other hand, gives you things like ability to solve business problem, deal with real data, which is like a big thing in like machine learning and AI these days, and many others, right? I mean, we kind of at some uber level, we know these aspects, right? But again, emphasizing what Nitendra said, right? Important question is, this is not an absolute ordinal attribute that one is better than the other. Important question is what matters to most of you, matters the most to you, right? I mean, ask that question. Now, do you have the answer like at any stage of our student life or anything, right? I mean, most cases, no. I mean, in one hand, I know of people who was my classmate during my middle school, and he had said that he will do a PhD in history and do research in history. And he eventually did that, and one of the most successful professor in there, right? On the other hand, I also know of people who have switched between academia and industry multiple times after starting their professional lives and still have had very successful career, right? So, I mean, my sense is that if you have a natural inclination, if you are like my middle school friend, I mean, just go for it. I mean, it's much easier for you, right? If not, one general suggestion I give to people at some stage, and this is where I'm becoming a bit more prescriptive perhaps, that after going through your maybe BTech or MTech, it may not be a bad idea to spend a few years in the industry, right? Maybe in the labs or in the applied science and so on. The reason I say this is that because in some way, we are familiar with the academic ecosystem, not as faculty members, but as students. I mean, we were pushed into this funnel of education and we went through it and we saw the teachers, we saw many role models, many stalwarts and figures in our teachers and everything, right? But we don't have any experience about industry, right? So going and spending some time there, learning how things work. I mean, some of the big things that Nitendra said or I'm trying to say are you experience it yourself and just see that if that is your cup of tea, right? And it's not and it's not an irreversible decision that you're taking for yourself, right? I mean, you can definitely go to industry, work for some time, and I see that's a general trend of question also, and go for a PhD, right? I mean, and as I have said earlier, that actually helped in many cases.
Sure. So one thing I would also request for the panelists, if you're okay, please look at the chat. I think some people are quite, by the time others are answering, if you want to pick some questions or answers, feel free to do it. People are also reacting, thanks, awesome answer, all that. So it may be good for you to also. But here is one question to Nupur, and then I'll come back to Jayant about this part-time PhD. I think this part-time PhD question is regularly coming. But Nupur, I remember our conversation and you said that you were also at this point of saying, oh, Purdue Masters, and you were thinking of, you had this option of doing a PhD, but can you just walk us through like a minute or two on what was the process at that point in time in deciding that, look, I'm not too sure whether I want to take this?
Right. So I was in this stage of decision making when I was completing my master's. I had the option of converting it to a PhD, or I could just quit with a master's degree and join corporate, right? So I think my decision making was, like others also said, right? I saw uh, what where I saw myself 5 years later. What is my personality type? What are the kind of problems I enjoy working on, right? And I started sort of writing down answers to all of these questions, and then I sort of have a lot of discussions with my friends, family, and even professors actually, to understand if I want to sort of invest next 5 years of my life in doing a PhD, or do I want to join like a corporate world. And at that time, I actually decided, okay, I have been in academia. I completed my bachelor's. I took 1 year break. Then I did my master's, right? I did not have so much corporate experience by then. So I thought like, okay, let me just join corporate world once. And if I do not like it, I'll probably come back to academia. But I think things went well. I did not come back to academia after that. I joined corporate world. I was in product company for a long time. Then I switched to IBM research. So things sort of worked out for me. But I think sort of similar decision-making process a lot of students go through in different phases of their lives.
Okay, good. So Jayant, this question now, I think more questions have been posed on this, but let's take this question, which is Nitendra and Shourya also recommended that, look, take some break after masters into industry. So I'm in the industry and then I want to do PhD. I think this pool is really big now. I think lots of people are in the industry who want to do PhD. So what are the options for them? Part-time PhD. So I think there are questions also, will professor take me? I'm a little older now. So all these questions, how does one deal with some of these problems when I'm in the industry but want to do PhD?
Yeah, that's actually a complex optimization problem. And what you find is that it's very important then that the choice of problem is done such that it is interesting to both your parent company as well as your advisor. Because often we have a very successful external research program at IISc, which has been running for several decades now. The cases where we find that there is a problem is that when the student is doing something with the advisor which is completely different to what is the interest of the company. Initially the company will be very nice, saying yes, we want you to just have a very good education, please go ahead and do it. But sooner or later reality steps in, and after a year or two they would want you to come and spend most of your time working on their problems. And as Nupur already said, there is a bottom line that the company is responsible to stake shareholders and so on. They need to spend time on it. And then there will be this tension between the two, where the advisor is pulling in one direction and the manager is pulling in the other. It becomes very hard. Plus, if you are considerably older at that time, then also there may be family responsibilities and so on. So you have a third pull, and all of these three are working in different directions. So you feel that in a sense stuck between all these competing pressures. But if you spent a year or two in industry and then came back to do a PhD even part-time, as long as the problem is of interest at both sides, then you can actually make a good success of it, because both of them are invested in the same problem. If there are two different things, then you would be running into difficulties. And continuing on what Shourya said, the utility of the industry, I would say, is that you become a lot more professional and productive with your time. In academia, you're used to having a lots of chat sessions in the hostels and so on, and many other things will be going on. I think once you go to industry, you become a little more mature, you know what is expected, and you see yourself somewhat differently. So more than the technical skills, I think you learn a lot of social skills also with regard to presentation, how to be nice to your advisor even if you don't like him or her. Okay, many of these diplomatic skills, everything else you learn. So it's a good finishing school for the soft skill side of it, and then you can come back and do a good job in the academia as well. But if you take it too long, then many other pressures start setting in. So I would say maybe 2 years in industry and then coming back to academia is certainly a good recipe, where you have also learned all the tools, because we find many of our students are not aware of even things like Eclipse and so on, which are programming environments, which in industry would be mandatory. You also know how to program well and to document things and so on. So some of this professionalism, I think, comes in, which is often lacking in academia.
PK, I will add a few things here, especially because of the fact that I have actually gone through this part-time PhD in IISc that Jayant referred to, right? And that too at a considerably old age, because when I went to the PhD program, I was already a father of 2 kids, and one of them being 1.5-year-old. And now, why I did it so late and everything, though that's a different question. But it was indeed a challenging exercise, and it was very challenging while doing, I mean, while my company was supportive, I had kind bosses in the company and everything. And my advisor, Professor Y. Narahari from IISc, is one of the most kind and humble people I have ever known. So everything kind of, I mean, that way the people side was okay. And my, yeah, and on the third pool that Jayant mentioned, my wife is also, yeah, reasonably nice, given that it's a public forum. Yeah, so that side was kind of better managed for me. But what I had to do is that one thing that really helped me, because during those 12 years before I went for my PhD, I was throughout in the industrial research in the labs of IBM and Xerox I spent. So I happened to publish many papers, and I knew the quote unquote the art of writing papers, how to send a rebuttal to the reviewer number 2, and all those things I kind of knew. So I knew some of those tricks, if I may say so. So that really helped. But I cannot underemphasize the point of being disciplined and managing time well and being professional with your work to manage these two demanding life together. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. I mean, you will just let it go. You can't let go your job because your house loan is still running, home loan is still running. But so you will let go of the PhD, right? And that has happened to probably some very brilliant people I know and some people I looked up to, but they could not just continue on these things, right? And one last thing I'll say that, I mean, the ideal combination in my also opinion is also like work for a couple of years and then go for a full-time PhD, because PhD is in my opinion, it's an immersive experience. I mean, part-time PhD is a kind of balance in you are trying to do to get something done. But PhD full-time is the best choice in my opinion, because you get to learn a lot. PhD is not only on working on one problem, but you get to know the world much more in depth. So go for it. And finally, I mean, then this is also a question I have seen in some of the chats and previous submitted questions, that the kind of things like opportunity cost of doing a PhD or not doing a, I mean, instead of doing the PhD, or versus I should spend that 5 years in industry, will that give me, I mean, it did not say pay package, but probably meant that. Yeah, and that's, I mean, and in my opinion, if you have that question in mind, that whether there is an opportunity cost of going for a PhD, think very hard on it or don't go for it, because you need to have that. It should be a hashtag life goals for you to be able to complete. Otherwise, it's difficult.
Okay. So one follow-up question to Jayant, and then 2 questions connected to this. So you mentioned that IISc has this program for getting part-time PhD. But let's go beyond IISc. I think the questions are also right. Getting into IISc also may be harder. And you also said that the company there is some connection between the company to sponsor the PhD student. If I don't have the option, let's take I work for a company where none of this is available, where the interactions with IISc is not there. So what are my options?
That would be a tough life, certainly, because it's over a long period of time. Over a short period, you can always make adjustments and, in some sense, cut corners and so on. But over an extended period of 3 to 5 years, it's very hard to do that consistently. So I would say that at least the minimum thing that we should be trying to do is to say that whatever problem that I'm working on in academia, especially if it's a part-time PhD, has some relevance to the company as well, so that they would also feel that you are doing something that would eventually help the company's bottom line as well. Or the other option is to say that give me 3 years away from the company, I'll go and do the PhD and then come back. That is also an acceptable proposition, because then you can say that I have only single pressure, I'll work very hard, get my 3 years done, and then go back to the company. But trying to, in a sense, manage both of them although they are completely independent of each other, each of them, my view is that industry or academia takes 200% of your time, each of them. So how do you put them together unless there is some sense of cohesion between the two?
Sure. So this question is to Nitendra.
So if I may add a few things here, right? So actually the word part-time is only in the name. It's actually more than 2 full-time jobs. And the second thing is like the other model that Professor Jayant talked about, right? Taking a break from corporate. It's actually, I think I've seen this model fairly common in management studies, where
Nupur, we can't hear you.
same company, right? So that sort of a model, if you can work out with your company, would be useful to do for PhD also.
So Nitendra, this question is to you. So this part-time PhD is great. I think that's the discussion that we're having. But how does industry look at part-time PhD for finding a job? Let's take I work for a company. In the process, I get the job, but then later I want to, now that I have the PhD, I want to move around to finding a different job. How does part-time PhD gets evaluated in an industry interview?
I don't think that there is any significant difference that people see whether it's a part-time or a full-time PhD. Once you have a PhD, then industry generally looks at the credentials, and more importantly, I think what the industry looks at is it's not just the name or the stamp of the PhD. Maybe that will help you get your resume on the top perhaps, but the ones who get the job are the ones who have done stuff in their PhD. So what kind of publications do you have? Whether you have a PhD or not is what matters. What are the problems that you have solved? Those are the things that matter more. But I agree, at times it does happen that certain jobs actually, and I PhD degree, wherein maybe that's where the scope of not having a PhD gets reduced. But so maybe you will get more opportunities initially, but once you get it to a certain level, then it's just what you have done irrespective of your degree or stamp, and definitely not whether it's a part-time or a full-time is what matters in the industry.
Yeah. Okay, great. So now the last question in the notes that I took is for a question to all four of you, quickly, like this rapid fire round. How do I manage my time? One, two shots. How do you manage your time? Tools, techniques, prescriptive answers. Shourya.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, being disciplined, use calendar, and be ready to go through the grill.
Okay, Nupur.
So what I do is basically I write down everything that I have to do, make small milestones, be disciplined, manage your calendar well, right? So a lot of us have this ability to overestimate the time we have, and manage your calendar well. That will really help you in the long term.
Okay, so I would say for a student, find a tough advisor. You'll thank yourself for the rest of your life for that. So, because but just more seriously, I want to say that people often think that physical work is hard and mental work is easy. It's actually the other way around. It's much easier to control your body than to control your mind. Because the moment you start thinking of a problem, it's hard. You say, oh, let me go to Netflix or Amazon Prime and so on, or there's so many other things going on. I'll come back to it tomorrow. So controlling the mind is much harder than controlling the body. So that getting that discipline takes a lot of work. So either you have to have it yourself, or as I said, this easier thing is to have a tough advisor who keeps asking every morning, okay, what did you do yesterday? Yeah. And sooner or later the message gets to you.
Okay. Nitendra, your tips for managing time?
I think you need to be really self-driven, and you have to be ruthlessly truthful and honest to yourself. That is my side of the story, because either you put yourself in a difficult situation so that there are people or professors or advisors who are forcing you to do things, or if you can be self-driven, then you don't need that ecosystem. That's my side of the story.
Okay. Let's go to some questions from. Yeah, so this also came back, I think, multiple times, but let's take this one. So this is directed to Jayant. Whether one should focus more on professors in a particular area or the reputation of the institute, considering the fact that institute reputation and reach might play a role in getting future teaching industry officers. This is, I think, a typical question that a student who is applying is asking.
Right. Actually, I think this is an excellent question, whether you go with the larger framework or the specific people who are within that institution. And I would strongly urge that you should just focus on the professors in the area, because you are primarily going to be working with them for the next 5 years of your life. So even if the overall institution is fine, but the individual is terrible, then you're going to have a hard time. And my view is that even if, let's say, an institute itself is not well known, if these are very successful professors, they'll be highly visible in the international community. And ultimately, it's their reference letters that will take you to the next step. And if people know them, they will immediately sign off and saying that, okay, this top person has written extremely commendable statements and laudatory statements about the student, then I don't even think too much about it. So I would say that you should just go with the professors in the area because it is a long-term decision. For masters, you could probably think of going to a high-profile university because then many of the job opportunities open up. But for PhD, I would always go with the professors. Okay? And IISc has many of them. Okay? Please do come here, sir.
So for participants asking about these questions about how to find research problems, how to write research papers. So I think I just posted 2 links where the first AMA and the second AMA we did, where we discussed. I'll recommend you to take a look at there. If we get time, we'll get into it. But I think because this conversation is not about just doing that, so to say, writing papers and all of that, right? Okay, next question. Yeah. So Shourya, this is for you. Does it take a lot of background preparation before PhD application in a particular area? So this question is again following up on what the question to Jayant was. Look, I'm applying. What all do I? Because I think there's a lot of things that goes into deciding on sending my application.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, let me. Which said, reviewing PhD applications this year in ML and AI. At this point, we might as well just say applicants already need a PhD to get accepted for a PhD program, right? So, I mean, I know it's a bit, probably a bit stretched, but yes, I mean, preparation is of course needed. I mean, and especially in certain fields in computer science, like machine learning, which is extremely popular these days. There's an extreme intense competition, and especially if you want to work with either be in the renowned institutions or work with good people, I mean, renowned people, there is competition. So yes, I mean, you should definitely go through, I mean, it requires preparation. And even that interview that happens during the admission process, that also requires some preparation, right? I mean, and especially, I mean, I know in Indian institutes, they definitely publish like a syllabus and subjects that you can choose from, etc. So do prepare well. I mean, don't take that lightly. I mean, yeah, I mean, do prepare well.
Anybody else wants to add into the same question? Otherwise, we can move on. Okay, so this I think is a controversial question. Let's see if we can get all 4 of you answer this question, which is which one is better in terms of quality of life, academic, industry, stress, all of this. So floor is open, but let's start with Nupur.
I mean, this assumes that either side people have some quality of life. Sorry, Nupur, go ahead.
Yeah, Nupur.
So I don't have actually much experience with academic life since I did not pursue PhD, but I think my life in industry is, I am enjoying the work I do in industry and the kind of skill set I end up developing, because like my job is not only about developing the product, right? It's also about selling the product to the business so that the business shows interest in what we are doing. So I think I am all in favor of industry, but because I don't have any experience in academia.
Shourya?
I mean, it's very personal, actually, in my opinion. I mean, what matters to you, right? I mean, if you have the reasons to be in academia, you should be in. If you feel motivated to do real business problems kind of work, that's the choice. I don't think there is any absolute in terms of quality of life. There are different facets out there. This, as Nitendra was earlier mentioning, research is not a unidimensional thing. Similarly, this quality of life is also not unidimensional.
Jayant?
Yeah, I would say just like Shourya mentioned earlier, both are lousy. if and this is the important part, if your personality is not suited for them. So the important issue is to figure out, again, as Shourya mentioned, what you enjoy doing. So it's the question is, think of it like this. If somebody asked you, is football a better game than tennis or the other way around? Could you even come up with an answer? So football, I would say, is more like industry since it's a team effort. And some people like it very much. Tennis is more like academics since it's largely individual or at most you play doubles. But both are exceptional and nice games. key issue to decide is what is good for you. Okay, so there is no one size fits all here. You have to look at it very selfishly and look at it from your own personality and saying, what do I like doing? And then you'll find the automatic quality of life.
Yeah, Nitendra?
I don't have much to say here. You can just look at my background, how colorful it is. That shows the quality of life. But I think I do have a very strong point here. And what I feel is that if you want to do something in a particular direction, you have to put in a lot of energy. And to put in a lot of energy, you need a lot of focus. Maybe PhD brings that focus, which is perhaps, if that's your goal, then you should do that. But it also takes your energy out of other things. So if you want to have a broader perspective of things and so on and so forth, generally in life, maybe I would say that not doing a PhD may be a good thing. And that's what actually I chose for myself. I thought that I'm already doing work which is related to technical stuff and so on. If I do a PhD also, then that's also technical. So let me do other things related to sports or something, music and so on and so forth. And that's how I, in some sense, decided that that's what I want in life. So yeah, I mean, what Jayant is also saying is right. You need to know what you want in life, but it's a very important point in some sense. That drives your quality of life.
So this question is driven by this: why should I do PhD, right? So I'm just rephrasing some questions here. So how do I decide as an undergrad whether I want to do PhD or not? What are the things? Is there some prescriptive things that you can suggest? Let's start from Jayant. You can suggest on doing things where, I mean, it looks abstract, right? What do I want in life? I think it has come up multiple times. Look for what is it you want in life, but how do I figure that out?
Yeah, so this is a tough question, but I would say that PhD should be a crime of passion. It cannot be a carefully calculated reverse engineering from certain perceived outcomes saying, oh, that's where I will reach and therefore I'll work backwards to this. But I would at least also say that some of the things that undergraduates especially should be aware of is that they have a lot of myths surrounding the PhD. Their impression is that it's a nice linear narrative where you do BTech, MTech, and PhD. And I always say that that's not true, because in the BTech and the MTech, largely you're being taught about analysis, and PhD is primarily about design. So think of it as two railway tracks. On one side track, you have the BTech and the MTech, which in some sense lead on from one to the next because they are teaching you material and you are supposed to be able to understand it well. But in the PhD, you're supposed to create new knowledge. And that is a very different exercise, because design and analysis are two completely different things. And there are many people who are excellent at design and poor at analysis, or the other way around. Just look at it with regard to films. Okay, you have many film critics who will come and tell you this particular part of the movie was bad, the script was not good there, this songs were not so melodious, and so on. You might then wonder, okay, why don't the critics like Rajiv Masan and so on go and make their own movie? They would do it perfectly, right? Because they know all the problems with it. But being good at analysis doesn't mean you're good at design. And these two are completely different talents. One is a highly creative exercise. The other is a highly analytical understanding of the whole ecosystem. And some people are lucky, of course, they can do both. But you need to verify whether you have those creative abilities or not. And there is no crime in not having it. Okay, it's perfectly fine to be a film critic, or it's perfectly fine to be actually an actor or a musician and so on. But only through exploration can you figure this out. There is no prior thing that you can take an insurance policy saying, if I don't get it here, something else will happen. You must explore. And something which I find which is peculiarly an Indian problem is that we want instant gratification everything. Saying we want children who start coding at 6. You can see in the newspapers. We want students who gain PhDs at 20-year-old. We want 2-minute Maggi noodles. Okay? So if you're going to live to 100, of course, modulo COVID and so on, then enjoy the scenery and don't rush through like a bullet train. Explore things. Okay, you need to understand a lot about yourself, because these decisions are about you. It's not about a herd mentality or a herd immunity that you're gaining. You should not ask your nanny or your uncle or your masi or anybody else. You have to ask yourself, what do you want to do? And I always tell people that you should be like goats and not sheep. Goats are extremely independent. They are stubborn. They are persistent. Sheep will go with the rest of the crowd. You need to think for yourself and say, what should I be doing? Try it out. If it fails, so what? Okay, try out the PhD for a couple of years. If it doesn't work out, move on. I actually had one of my classmates at Wisconsin. He did the PhD for 3 years and then said, look, I don't feel this is the right place for me, and went off to teach high school in Montana. So there is no social stigma that one should associate by saying, "Oh, I didn't finish the PhD." You are exploring things. You are finding out more about yourself. It may work out, it may not, but there's nothing wrong with it. And you should actually celebrate yourself for having had the courage to try it out in the first place. But don't feel that in some sense you have failed. Okay, this notion of failure is very common in India, that something doesn't happen. Oh, I failed. The process of having had the courage to try it out itself means that you're not a failure, because only brave people will have taken that step in the first place.
Another thought is that when you are an undergraduate, it may be also good to look at your role models. What kind of people inspire you? Are they PhDs or not PhDs? That may give you an answer whether you want to head in this direction or that.
If I may put a bit, maybe a bit crude comment, right? I mean, often this dilemma comes from the fact that how soon you are starting to earn money, right, at the undergrad, and that kind of blurs up a lot of rational thinking in our mind, I feel, right, in a way. I mean, maybe in some cases there are financial scenarios actually pushes us, but not in many cases, and or most cases perhaps, right? I mean, just building on what Jan said, right? I mean, there's no need to rush. I mean, given that you are doing undergrad engineering, you probably and going and anyway doing job, and if you want to try that out, just give yourself that opportunity, that chance to do it. Don't get blurred by the fat packages that the companies are offering, and to your decision making. If you want to go for it, do it, and be there, that's perfectly fine, right? But and in a way, so that's another perspective to look at in terms of that undergrad at the time the decision making that the question was about.
Sure, let me continue with the question to you, because I think you must have gone through this process. So the question is, look, I'm applying for PhD. Now, should I take a professor? Should I want to work with a professor who's like very well known but has less time to give me, or should I work with or should I apply to a professor who's like junior, who has a lot of time but is not really well known? How do I kind of find an answer to this question?
Right. So I can tell you my personal experience, right? As I said, right, when I went for my PhD, I had some reasonably significant research experience being in the labs for close to 12 years. So I kind of knew some of the basic ingredients, right? So I wanted to, two things I wanted to do. I wanted to go into a different area than where I have been working on. And that's one of the reasons I thought that, I mean, game theory is an area which fascinated me at the cursory level. And that's where I wanted to go. And I went there. And I'll come to the whatever idiosyncrasy later, but that's one of the reasons that I chose. The second one is that when I chose that area, who is the best person in that field? And in India, perhaps arguably there is no one more renowned in game theory than Professor Vaidyanathan, whom I worked with, right? So that's the thing, right? I mean, yeah, Professor Narahari was very busy in during his time, but he was very disciplined and he gave me the time, that periodic interval. But for me, it was not the constant interaction that needed. I needed the broad steering and guidance from him, and in a way, right? Now, incidentally, it happened that eventually I did not do actually the research in game theory. That's how my PhD thesis evolved. That's a separate thing. But I did not need like a very, very close monitoring and he also gave me that space to operate independently, which worked very well for me. But if someone going with a less research experience, it may be a good idea to actually consider young faculties as well, who can pretty much like a whatever non-playing captain and guide the player very closely from the playing ground.
Sure. So Jayant, for your thoughts, I think this question as faculty we regularly get. So if you can throw some light on this.
Yeah, so this is to some extent depends on what kind of relationship you want your advisor. If you want somebody who is closely monitoring you and in a sense hand holding you through the initial processes, that often happens with young faculty because they are at the top of their game. They have very clear ideas of what they're doing, and in a sense you get carried along with that that same kind of flow of thoughts and ideas. On the other hand, if you have a senior person, they will probably give you more time to explore for yourself. Of course, it can be also more a little intimidating because you don't know what is happening, and you only see them in the airports and in the lounges and so on, and they'll just ask you, "Oh, things are going fine," and it doesn't matter what you answer. They'll say, "Very nice," and move on with that. So it's a double-edged sword, and I think it is hard to kind of again be prescriptive in these. It more depends on your own personality and how, because some people, for example, find that if you're having they also ask, should you have a nice advisor or a tough advisor? Okay, I often say that having a tough advisor is very good. Why? Because it prepares you for the life after this. So it's like an army boot camp. It's hell when you go through the boot camp, but subsequently when you are on the battlefield, you'll thank your stars that you had a very difficult sergeant or corporal who put you through all the hoops there. If you have a very nice advisor, then later on when you do your postdoc or you go into your own academic position, you may find it very difficult to survive on your own, because now you don't have this nice cocoon where everybody is supportive for you. So often experiencing hell during the PhD makes it easy for you to survive later, whereas if you had a heavenly atmosphere, depending on your abilities, you may suddenly find yourself in very deep waters outside, saying, I don't now have this extremely supportive ecosystem that I was used to. So it, to some extent, depends on your own personality. If you are a very independent types, then I would say go, maybe you would be able to manage with the senior faculty, even if they don't spend so much time, because you are pushing it through yourself. Like, for example, Shourya was very experienced when he joined the PhD program. He knew what he wanted to do. Even though the targets may be changing, it's not that he expected somebody to walk him through the steps. Whereas if you are somebody much younger, then you may think that you might want to work with somebody who is there in the trenches with you. I would say just talk to all the people and see who you feel most comfortable with.
Sure. So now this question is both to Nitendra and Nupur. So how do you deal with, so for example, having a PhD, right, and not having a PhD in terms of industry jobs? Let's take your day-to-day life. Is there anything that both of you are at IBM and at MasterCard? Do you see anything that you miss not having this PhD in your day-to-day job?
I can go first. Okay, so I think in industry, what really matters is the impact that you bring to the table, right? And that sort of drives everything, your career, your compensation. So whether you have a PhD or you don't have a PhD, once you sort of enter industry, it doesn't matter day-to-day basis, I would say. And all that matters is basically your creativity and the impact you're bringing to the table.
Okay, Nitin?
Yeah, I would echo similar things, but I think it changes with the amount of time you spent in the industry. In the initial years, perhaps it does matter, and that you are a PhD versus you are not a PhD. Maybe you will get people who will report into you based on their degrees and so on and so forth. But over a period of time, what matters is the role that you are actually working on. Are you doing it with the right level of discipline that is required, or the right level of foresight that is required, which is one of the things that you learn in a PhD. Think about a problem that you can solve, which is really difficult and so on. Can you take such challenging problems of the industry and so on and so forth? And I don't think after a while, maybe after spending 5-10 years or so in the industry, I don't think anyone actually looks at whether you have a PhD or not. It's only about that particular role. Are you doing good in that role? Then you move to the next role in some sense. The only place where I feel a difference is at times when you have to, even after 15-20 years, I'm not talking about myself, but in general, even after that many years in the industry, if you have to move out to a new job, then that stamp definitely helps, because that's your first entry point. Oh, he's a PhD. Okay, let me get that person.
I think I just want to add one more thing on that, right? There are certain roles that are actually reserved for PhDs. So at that point, it might matter, right? So if you're going for like a pure research scientist role and pure research roles, there are a lot of labs doing fundamental research, right? And those labs may not prefer non-PhDs.
And if I may just add one thing here, I mean, actually plus one to what Nitendra said, right? I mean, it's in some cases, like going into a new job or applying for a new job, it's a checkbox that is marked, right? If you have a PhD, and that gets you probably the first call or the first conversation. But I mean, that doesn't take you through to the job, or definitely not afterwards. It's all about what you do there. And there, your formal training in PhD might actually help you to get those done, but that is not a necessary criterion at all. I mean, you can get much better. I mean, I know many people who have done excellent research in these industrial settings without having PhD. So and they have grown up to the ranks. manage people with PhDs, maybe teams of PhDs, and so on and so forth. So it's not a showstopper in any manner from the industrial job perspective.
Yeah. So the next question is, let's go to Jayant. The question is getting a PhD closing doors for me? Is there any situations where you see that, look, I've narrowed myself so much that it's just closing a lot of doors for me? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you have no other option but to join academia because you have become unfit for all other productive occupations in life. But I don't see that nowadays. In fact, that has, I think, dramatically changed. Is that earlier, maybe about even 20, 30 years ago, you used to take up a particular profession and live through it until retirement or superannuation, as they like to call it in our Indian government systems. And you just spent your whole life doing that. So either you are in industry or in academia. But today you see there's a revolving door, especially with the large multinational companies, with the Googles, the Microsoft, the Flipkarts, and IBMs, and so on. You find people are spending some time in academia, then they go off to industry, spend some time there, then come back. And nowadays, you even have this more interesting notion where people are spending 50% of their time in the academic organization and 50% time in the industry, like Professor Milind Tambe is at 50% time in Harvard and 50% time in Google India and so on. So all kinds of combinations are being tried out today. And there is a lot of opportunity now to, in some sense, fit your career to suit your interests. Some people are pure bowlers, some people are pure batsmen, and some are all-rounders, and others are umpires. You can choose whatever you want to be, and you can also move across these different roles. It's not that for the rest of your life you have to be confined to doing one particular kind of thing. If you find that you'll enjoy what you're doing, then maybe you'll just be the same thing. But there are others who will take on many other roles. They will be as I said, person A in the first 10 years of life, person B in the next 10 years, person C somewhere else. You constantly reinvent yourself also, and so on. So at least those opportunities are there right now, and you're not straitjacketed into being just one-dimensional. And I think already Nitendra and Shourya and Nupur also pointed out there are many facets in both life and career, and you have to explore all of them. And if you find your groove, more power to you. But if you want to keep shifting also, that is certainly available, and maybe it enriches each of your the separate careers that you found for yourself. You may find that one can actually help the other as well. Okay, you may be a synergistic kind of a human being who leverages one at the in the other occupation and moves on to become better at everything that you do.
So this question, let's go to Shourya, this because part of the PhD life. So the question is, how do I manage focusing on one problem? Because PhD, I think we're generally suggesting that, look, there is going to be one problem, while also exploring other interesting problems. Is there something that can be done? Is this part of PhD life?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have seen people doing that. I personally did not do that, but I mean, of course, I mean, there is one problem or one probably small group of problems that you go in depth completely, right? But in any standard academic setup, when a faculty runs a lab which has probably multiple PhD students, and they also collaborate among themselves, right? And as a result, you get an exposure to an adjacent area, and in often it happens that you get kind of go and solve a problem which is maybe marginally related to your PhD thesis, but actually probably broadly related to someone of your lab mate's PhD thesis, right? I mean, and it happens quite often. But at the same time, I would emphasize the point that you have your idea, your problem statement where you are going in depth, and that's probably the primary yardstick that you should have in mind.
Sure. Let's go to the
If I could just add a point there, I think you have to be careful that the second problem doesn't become an escapism from the first problem, which is, I think, what Shourya was also mentioning, is that that's usually our human nature, is to say, I'm finding this too hard, let me do something else so that at least I feel that I'm productively using my time. But you actually need to stick with the original problem. In case you are able to also do some collaborative work on the second problem that gives you a way to change the scenery and refresh your mind and so on, that's fine. But it should not become that you run away from your original goal of your thesis because you are finding it too hard, and therefore find the second one as a kind of an antidote to this situation.
Sure. Let's stick to Jayant. The question is, I'm scared of giving 5 years for PhD. So how do I get scared feeling? I can't make a judgment.
I think, see, as I kept saying, that PhD should be something you do with passion and not because you reverse engineer it from some outcomes. Yeah. But let me give you an example of Professor Venki Ramakrishnan, whom I have tremendous respect for. He's our Nobel Prize winner in chemistry in 2009. So if you look at him, he did these three things which are completely contrary to what Indians do. Yeah. The first thing is that when he was at the MS University in Baroda, he moved from the MBBS program to BSc. And even the clerks in the office thought this something is wrong. This guy has put the wrong direction. It's usually the other way around that people are moving. The second thing is that he did his PhD in physics in Ohio, and then said, I don't think I'm cut out for physics. He went to started a PhD program in biology in San Francisco. Then the third thing that he did, which is astounding for people, especially those who are in the software industry or the students in computer science, where you're used to usually doubling your salary with each move up the hierarchy, he actually went from the US to England to Cambridge at half his original salary. Now, once he has got a Nobel Prize, we say, of course, even I would do all those things because the Nobel Prize is there. But he did it before knowing that he'll get the Nobel Prize. So in that sense, I think it is very important for us to say, let's do what we are passionate about. And unless if there are financial restrictions, as was mentioned out, then maybe your family requires you to slightly modify your career to suit their requirements. But if those immediate pressures are not there, spend time exploring. This is something we don't do in India. We want insurance policies. Anything I do should work out correctly. And that means that you are not going to be creative. You are always going to be taking the safe option out. You are going to be an LIC. Instead, you need to step out and do risky things. And 9 times out of 10, you will fail. But the 10th time, you will come out looking extremely good. So that should be my message.
I think just when you mentioned that I am scared of the 5-year thing, that word scared is really good for us to latch on to it. In fact, we should always do things. I go to the industry to talk to some boss, day after tomorrow I'll be scared to someone who is in my family and so on. The more, as soon as we realize that we are scared of something, I think that's an opportunity for us to start going and doing that, because next time we won't actually, we'll forget about what scare is in some sense.
Nitendra, for the interest of making the panel interesting, let me disagree with you. I think the word scare is not from the fact that whether I will succeed or not, but it's also probably that what I am missing out, right? If I go and spend 5 years in an institute, I am missing out the job in the company and so on and so forth. So in my mind, I mean, if you are scared or apprehensive about doing getting into a PhD, probably you should not do that. I mean, and rather be super convinced about going for it.
There is a subtle difference. I like something, but I'm scared of reaching that path. Versus, I don't like it, therefore I agree that you shouldn't go for it. But if you like it, just because you're scared you shouldn't do it, that's not the right thing, is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Okay, then I have to agree.
Oh, this is like bungee jumping, right? We all love it, but we certainly don't want to do it. I think.
So this question is to Shourya. So this question,
and just want to add it to this is that even so, you take the chance and you are scared. Try it for a year. That's what I keep saying. Try it for a year. At the end of it, you know whether your fears are well founded or not. If you succeed, you'll say, "Oh, I loved this thing." If you find that you didn't like it after a year, get back to whatever you're doing. But spend time exploring. That is the critical point in a PhD. Don't expect pre-certified answers to come to you.
sure. So this question is to Shourya. Shourya, by doing PhD, I'm told that, look, I have to focus on specific problems, go deeper, all that. Is so to say, developing solutions also part of the PhD process itself? Or should it be a process, part of the process, which is not just finishing up with papers, but build systems and things like that? How much is it expected these days of that part?
Oh, it is absolutely increasingly becoming expectation, not only good to have, but expectations that your PhD thesis should lead to systems, and many cases maybe working systems in not beyond your own laptop and in the wild, and that's kind of becoming very, very common in I mean definitely in the fields that I work. I know that's definitely is more common, and in fact to the extent, and PK, you would know this for all the audience, and in the way that there are many successful people who have their PhD thesis has actually become a fully funded startup company or maybe successful companies subsequently. And I know PK is one of them in way. So these are, so that's the point that I'm saying, that it's not only like developing a program to run experiments which goes as a graph in your paper, but these are like real practical systems which are probably used by a large bunch of people worldwide.
Yeah. So this question is to Jayant. The question is, see, I have an undergrad in ECE, but I'm actually interested in doing computer science, so to say, master's or PhD. I mean, do I see any roadblocks? Some institutes actually keep that as a roadblock, right? You have a BTech in ECE, so they say that no, you can't apply for. Yeah. So what should we do?
Yeah, paradoxically, you'll find that I actually recommend people from ECE to have the background there in engineering, because of course, I myself had a similar background, but there is a reason for that, is that people in computer science tend to forget the laws of physics. Okay? To give you a very simple example, often you find that they will give you a number which says that it is 3.67874323 and so on, so some 20-digit numbers. We ask you, how did you get such 20-digit accuracy for what you are measuring? He says, the computer gave it to me because it has 64-bit arithmetic. But if somebody has done an actual engineering program, they would have realized that you cannot improve your accuracy beyond that of the measuring instrument in the first place. So sometimes, because of having had a EC or any other engineering background, you are also aware that there are certain basic realities that what you are doing should adhere to. For example, that if I give more work to be done, it will take more time to do it. But if you find that your simulation program is running it faster when you gave it more workload into input, and you say, oh, the computer told me that, there's a danger that you start believing the computer. Whereas if you look at basic engineering, it's expected that you first listen to your stomach, then to your mind, and finally to the computer. That is the important part. So even in the computer science field, if people follow this, then it's fine. But I would say that in the engineering disciplines, to some extent, there is a respect for nature, and that what you are saying has to be compatible with that, and not that you just trust a blind instrument. So paradoxically, sometimes you may find that a strong engineering foundation may help you to come up with more robust results, even though you may not have the technical knowledge about data structures and some of the other algorithms and so on. Your belief in reality probably can sometimes help you understand systems much better.
Yeah, Shourya, now the question is about, let's take some questions about while doing PhD, right? What are the connects with the industry that I should keep? For example, let's take if my goal is to get a job in the industry, what are the options in front of me?
Yeah, so a couple of things, standard practices. One is definitely doing industry internships. That definitely helps in building that and connections and strengthening it over the years. There are many instances where actually PhD students who intern in a certain company, and after completing their PhD, they actually went and worked there, and not necessarily worked there, they probably continued their work in what they had started during the internship and so on. So that definitely establishes that connection. And also from an industry perspective, an internship is a much stronger indicator of goodness or badness of a candidate than an interview, right? So we definitely at industry, we always, I mean, all labs have these industry internship practices. And I just saw Nupur mentioning this on the chat as well, that do take that up if you are especially looking for industrial jobs after PhD. That's the most common thing that I would say. The other thing that I have seen in terms of making industry connection is there are, again, I mean, if your supervisor has certain projects in partnership with a company, maybe you want to you either be a part of it, tell your supervisor to make you a part of it, and so on and so on.
Okay. So let's do Nupur and Nitendra also. I think Nupur, you pointed out on the chat, but if there's anything more you want to add about industry connect with the PhD student.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, like internships are a great way. Second type of programs, you could look into long-term research collaborations between industry and academia, and where a lot of professors work with the industry. And so that's again a great way to sort of know people in the industry. I think the third I would say is that a lot of industries, in order to attract the right candidates, have sort of what I would say like open days, where they sort of just invite students and display their research. So it's sort of where companies trying to sell themselves to the students. So I think I would really encourage students to go and join and attend those sessions, because you get to interact with the people right in the lab. You can sort of make connect, follow up on those connects, and maybe help you land a job later also.
So Nitendra, while you're answering that, I'll add also this question, because when I saw one question, I thought we should pose this to you. Because you don't have a PhD, but you actually manage people now who have PhD. How is that part of your process, or how did that happen?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the first part was in terms of industry academic stuff. I also feel that while there are these forums like internships or industry day and so on, at a macro level, it is important to realize that if there is a particular problem that needs to be solved, when people in the academic world are looking at it, they have a certain perspective. I mean, they are sitting in, let's say, the green zone and so on and so forth. On the other hand, the people in the industry are looking at the same problem while trying to fight a fire in some sense, right? And both the perspectives are very different, and in some sense, very important to solve that particular problem. So wherever you get those opportunities to interact and get different perspectives on the same problem, you should use that, because whether you are in the academic world or you are in the industrial world, you will gain more insights about that problem if you hear different perspectives. And I think on the second point that you mentioned, PK, about managing PhDs and so on, I think it's more about the same part, that you have people who have a business mind of things, trying to see how this can get more revenue. Looking at that particular problem, you have people who have user experience type of background, who are trying to see how this can actually be used by people. You have people who have PhD type of a background, who are trying to see how this can be solved in the best possible manner. Now, the more diverse perspective you get, the better that particular solution becomes, and which is what the industry and in some sense the world appreciates. And that is why after a point really does not matter whether the captain is a bowler who is manning a batsman versus captain who is a batsman who's manning a bowler. And that's why I don't think it matters. And I hope people don't mind that I don't have a PhD, but I manage them.
Super, super. Shourya, this question is to you. So how much does product companies, inside product companies, I have a PhD, I join a product company. Do I continue doing research, or am I like put into lots of these develop karte raho, research chodo, abhi product banate hain?
Yeah, I mean, very good question. So it's a balance, a balance of two things, of what the company or the group is focusing at, as well as you as an individual, what you want to do, right? Now, I can give you an example. I mean, the example of Flipkart, right? I mean, Flipkart in the data science team, and there was a question on the chat as well, specifically about it, that as a data science team, we are an applied research team, right? Our primary emphasis is on building products and solving business problems for Flipkart and for the e-commerce domain in particular. And of course, that, by the way, involves cutting edge research, problem solving, developing new techniques, building on whatever new deep architectures and everything, right? We need to do everything. But the objective is to solve problems and make things in production, which also require much more going than actually training a model and so on, right? But at the same time, we as a team, we also have like active research collaborations with different academic institutes in India and outside. We have published papers, filed patents, people go and participate in conferences as an organizing member, as panelists, and everything. So, but does everybody need to do that? No, not necessarily. And that is the second part comes in terms of the individual preferences. So while we as a company, we encourage, but at the same time, it is individual's decision in terms of that, how much you want to do that.
Sure. So we have about 4 to 5 minutes left. So let's take 1 minute each for you. Do you want to summarize or say some things about, or let's start with Jayant. Jayant, how did you make the choice of doing PhD? I think this question was there. We kind of did not address it in the interest of time. But how did you decide on area to work on? And did you have what kind of advisors did you have? The combinations that we discussed. Your PhD life experience.
Yeah, I didn't have much choice. Both my grandfathers were professors, so that's pretty much the decision was made for me. But more seriously, actually, I think I enjoyed reading many of these, especially the IEEE transactions papers. And I used to say that, okay, it's not just science, it's also art, how you present the work. And I had always enjoyed writing a lot, even in my undergrad and so on, for the college magazine and stuff like this. So I thought this was the ideal ground where you could not only come up with creative ideas, but you could also have an opportunity to present them in the best possible manner and so on. So, but just to come back to a question which I saw from Rajkumar here in the chat, he says, is PhD, see, so far we are saying, is it academia or industry? But he asks a more basic question. He says, is PhD a waste of time if I don't end up either in industry or in academia? And what I want to point out is that we should not have this transactional view of education, that it's a means to an end. Education is an end in itself. It's a process of self-realization. It's a process of self-empowerment. You cannot say that I'm doing this for a particular thing. It changes your whole perception of life. And I found that when I joined the PhD program, actually, I was very immature. I didn't know why I was doing that. I said, let me do all the exams. And if I fail any of them, because in Wisconsin, typically 50% of the people who sat for the PhD exams were sent out, then the decision is made for me. And then I will go and join one of the software companies. It's only after passing the qualifying exams, suddenly realize, oh my God, I need to do something now. So it's not the right way to have actually approached the program, I would say, in retrospect. You need to go in there because you're a passion and not because it's the least common denominator of what else you can do. But subsequently, what I found was that this ability to spend your own time thinking about things without being any external pressures is very addictive. And I always say that being a faculty member, especially in an Indian academic institution, is the most irresponsible job in the world. You can just do whatever you like, and it's very addictive. Being a student is the second most irresponsible job because you only have to satisfy your advisor, the rest of it is left to you. So once you're used to that freedom, it's extremely addictive. It's very hard to get out of it. You want to do things yourself because you think you know what you are proceeding with. And this notion of creatively doing something which nobody else has done, it certainly gives you a great high. Okay, so either you can have marijuana or you can have this, and this is probably less troublesome to your health. Okay? So each time I'm sure any of the Nupur or Shourya or Nitendra have written a paper, you get a thrill, and there is a certain kick and a joy that you get out of it, especially if somebody whom you respect comes and says, I read your paper and this was good, or this product was very nice. It gives you a very strong sense of feeling of accomplishment and that you have done something which has been appreciated by the world at large.
Yeah, Nitendra, last thought, Nitendra, 4 minutes.
Yeah, all I would say is that, of course, you should spend a lot of time figuring out whether you want to go the route of PhD or not. But more important than that is to stick to that decision for your whole life. It is like choosing this particular path and then saying, oh, by the way, had I gone that path, this would have happened, and so on and so forth. No matter which path you take, whether you do a PhD or not, if you're already always trying to look on the other side, what could have happened then and there, that's not a great life to have. And more importantly, if you stick to what you've decided, and if you decide that this is what uh, I want to stand to my decision, you will actually do very well in that, whether it is PhD or non-PhD. In my specific example, I still remember that all my good friends like Shourya, they all ditched me and they started to do a PhD while I was still at IBM, not doing a PhD. And that was my conscious decision that, and I actually realized that 5 years or 4 years down the line, they will be a PhD. And after 5 years, their career will be much faster. And therefore, I had to make sure that what I do in those 4 or 5 years is something that will take me farther so that when they start running faster, I would still have some mileage to run along with them. So once you decide, you have to just stick to it, and you have to actually also have a game plan. Not doing a PhD, of course, has a plan, area, and so on and so forth. But not doing as a PhD also has an equally important path and a plan for you to follow.
Yeah, Nupur, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think what I would say, assuming success is what students are looking for, right? There's no recipe for success, right? You can choose PhD, non-PhD, or even whatever other area you are interested in. But what you have to remember is the hard work that you have to put in, right? And the hard work, you would not get gratification overnight, right? It will take years of hard work before you will start seeing fruits. So keep that in mind. Doesn't matter which area you pick, just make sure that you're putting in the hard work.
Just to quickly echo what Nupur said, redefine success to be whatever you're doing right now. That's success.
Yeah, Shourya?
No, actually, I mean, the summaries have been really, really apt. I mean, pretty much like, I mean, whatever you decide, stick to it and follow that, and you will do well. I mean, it's not, don't think about things like opportunity cost, right? I mean, and it's not going to help you. I mean, make a decision, think about it, deliberate on it, and then decide, and then give it a full honest effort. It's okay, as Jan gave an example that someone leaving from the PhD program 1 or 2 years after. I mean, it doesn't take any credit out of you, right? I mean, it's perfectly fine if you're given the honest effort and given the time to yourself, right? And secondly, I mean, it's a choice you are making, right? And if it is PhD or not PhD or academia and industry, in some cases you can probably alter for yourself, right? I mean, you start your career with industry, go back to academia, maybe at some later point in time, do a 50-50 with industry and academia kind of programs, right? So there are many opportunities that are there, right? I mean, it's just that give your honest attempt, and I'm sure you will be able to redefine success in what you are doing, as Jan said.
Yeah, sure. So I think Venkatesh is in the call. So he says that he wanted to say a few things. So if it's okay with you, Venkatesh, can you switch on the video and speak, Venkatesh? Yeah, Venkatesh, please.
Hey, hi. Nice to hear all of you, and particularly
for audience,
Jayant,
one-liner about yourself, or do you want me to do? Because audience should know who you are.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So Venkatesh Raman is a professor in.
A quicker introduction is Rajnikant of theoretical computer science with the glasses now.
Jayant always likes the sports or movie analogy. Yeah. So
sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to add a couple of perspectives. So Jayant started with saying, "Oh, PhD, you don't need any degree to do research, right?" So the way I actually explain this is that you go to a new place and you want to buy a house, or you want to rent a house, or you want to find a mobile plan. What do? You do research. So that's what research is about. So research is about carefully analyzing, looking at all possibilities and so on. And you don't necessarily need to combine it with a degree and publishing and so on. So I thought that's what Jayant started off saying. You don't really need a degree. See, my own perspective in my first about 10 years after my PhD, which is meaning in the about 20 years ago, I went around in many institutes encouraging people to do PhD, because I felt that people in India, even in IITs, had no clue about what. I mean, they will know what people are doing in Berkeley and MIT and Harvard, but not necessarily in IMSC or TIFR or something. So I was actually gospeling that people should do PhD, bright students should come, and so on and so forth. And however, in the last 10 years, I've started saying the other way. Whenever people come to me for advice, I always ask, are you sure? Do you really want to? And this connects again to what Jayant has been saying about passion and willing to put in, and not reverse engineer because I need to get a job in this college, so I need to do a PhD and so on. So I think again, I'm just to a large extent translating what or giving another perspective of what Jayant has been saying. Another point which Jayant kept saying is about explore. Right? In Indian context, we don't do it. Try for a year. But the problem for an undergrad student is that, okay, I will get a placement thanks to my institute, but you want me to give up that, go and try and PhD somewhere for a year, and then I fail. I go to an industry. First, the industry will think that I did not get placement, and that's why I went for PhD. And now, additionally, I also failed a year in PhD. So again, the point, I think it's a good, what Jayant is saying is good, but I think the point is to continue to develop marketable skills. I think that somehow that's, whether it's in industry or in academics, people value you for the kind of skills you have. Whether it's a good programming skills or good presentation skills or a rigorous way of analyzing things, modeling problems, whatever, and communicate that. I think that will take you wherever, that will give you a chance to explore a few things and go and keep going. Yeah. So those are the points I wanted to add. And I mean, this tennis, football analogy and all that were great. I enjoyed. I'll start using them whenever I discuss with people. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks. For the audience, if it's okay, can we give a round of applause for all the panelists and Venkatesh for joining in at the end. Just tuning in, please.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, all four of you, and Venkatesh for tuning into the whole discussion. Thanks to every single participant. I think the questions were great. Some questions we couldn't take because of the time constraint, or because some questions are very, very specific, which is always, I think you must have heard, right? Many of the answers are subjective to what you want. Given that we don't know who you are, it's hard to answer some of these questions. But please consider, if you're a PhD student and you want more insights onto what you're doing, please consider coming to the PhD clinic. I already posted a link to it, and this video also will be on YouTube. So feel free to actually share the video also. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining.
And thanks for allowing me to budget. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
And please ask all of them to become members of ACM India.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.